list of questions that you should start thinking through in terms of deployment. So I was so first of all, let me go back and introduce myself real fast for you guys who don't know me. My name is Blake Yeager. I work with HP in their cloud services group. I'm a product manager responsible for the infrastructure products that we're building in the HP cloud. Prior to HP, I spent 2 years at Rackspace in the Rackspace cloud. So I've been involved in OpenStack from the start. I think my kind of idea of getting things started was really to make this very interactive. I've got a list of kind of things that I think people should be thinking about when they start approaching a deployment of OpenStack. I've kind of got them grouped by the major services, and I figured we can kind of touch on it. I wanted to share a little bit of kind of some of our experiences at HP standing this up, some things we've learned, some mistakes we've made, but I really want to kind of just use it as a way to just kind of keep the conversation moving. Where's the interest? Should we start, more on the Nova side of things, or Swift, or where do people want to start? Is there a preference?
If you just dive into your experience standing up an OpenStack cloud, I suspect we'll all be right there with you.
All right, sounds good. So I think let's start with Nova, because I think that one tends to have a little bit more of configuration options, things you've got to choose, options you've got to make. So when we were kind of sitting back and deciding, what, we're going to do this, we're going to stand up a cloud based on OpenStack, based on Nova. Some of the first decisions we were making, one was, what operating system and hypervisor are we going to be running on our host nodes? And that's a pretty important decision. We personally, in the end, wound up going with Ubuntu on the host and running KVM. There's Zen Server. I know Rackspace is using Zen Server. Those, between KVM and Zen Server, obviously those are the two major supported hypervisors. There's minimal support for other ones out there. But I think so far we've been pretty pleased with that decision. And I think when you look at OpenStack and you look at the different interfaces, the EC2, the Nova EC2 API versus the Nova OpenStack API, I think the background of the project that a lot of people don't know is it was really, Nova was originally written to work with KVM and really to use the Nova EC2 API as the primary interface. And so, that code path there tends to be a little bit, in a little bit better shape than, some of the code path around the Nova OpenStack API and, Zen Server and some of the other hypervisors that are in there. So that's definitely kind of been our experiences, as far as completeness and having, had the most miles on that code. That's definitely the code path that we think has been the most vetted.
So Blake, was it because you guys wanted to use KVM and Ubuntu? Or
so I think
OpenStack lends itself better.
I think the first thing we were really looking at was, whether we wanted to go KVM or Zen Server, or Zen, Zen or Zen Server, some Zen-based hypervisor, and looking at kind of the communities today, some of the features and some of the momentum and where we saw kind of the roadmap. We felt that KVM was a slightly better fit, and so then the decision was, okay, well, if we're going to run KVM, what do we run underneath that? Do we use Red Hat and pay an arm and a leg to Red Hat for licensing, or do we go with something like Ubuntu where we could get support from a company like Canonical if we wanted, but we're not going to be forced to pay for a license for every host machine. So that's kind of where we wound up landing on Ubuntu with KVM.
It was easier for us. Ubuntu and KVM was like we tried to do CentOS forever because that's a lot of what we run, but yeah, it was just a pain, and we were fighting it. And I mean, this was like, January, February time frame.
Yeah.
AT&T. And yeah, it was killing us. And we were like, well, let's use Ubuntu. And we used it. And it was like, oh, that's easy. Should we use Zen or KVM? Oh, KVM's easy. All right. Yeah. Use KVM.
Yeah, I mean, most of the engagements I've been on, people have chosen Ubuntu because everyone else is using Ubuntu. I usually recommend LTS, but people have been skewing towards 10.10 when we started, or 11.04 and now 11.10, just because they assume it's got the best support because it's the latest.
Yeah.
It's not LTS.
Yeah. So is anybody running on 11.10? So we're personally running on 11.04 because it was the latest and greatest when we were getting started on this, and so that's one of the things we've been talking about is okay. At some point, we're gonna have to figure out how we're gonna upgrade. So I don't know. Is anybody running 11.10 out there?
We're deploying on 11.10.
You guys are deploying on 11.10. How's that been so far?
Rock solid.
Yeah.
Milestone 1, 2. So we're pretty much staying like the next major release of Ubuntu will be LTS, the 12.04, I believe. So once that comes out, we'll probably end up standardizing. But for now, we're just kind of pushing forward with
Just whatever the latest is.
OS, latest milestone, and just keep going.
Wayne,
that way.
is that Rackspace, or is that what you guys are doing for customers?
That's what. So Rackspace recently, no commercial, we made a product called Rackspace Private Edition, and that's what we're deploying for customers. So we give them the choice to go down to 10.04 up to 11.10, and it's up to them to choose which one that they want.
And do you guys have deployments that you've stood up on older versions that you're still maintaining, or have you tried to upgrade any of them?
The way that we're doing it actually is every customer that comes in is going to be put on the latest milestone, and we have a separate repository for certain backports, but we're not maintaining all of them. So if a customer comes to a point that says, hey, I need a major feature, we tell them, okay, well, to this point, there's no real clear upgrade path, so we're going to do a save and redeploy.
We did Debian stable one of the engagements I was on, and they had to do a lot of, kicking the fit with the Ubuntu stuff, but it worked.
But it worked. Cool. So that kind of gets into the next question, that you need to start thinking about, which is really around, how are you going to do, any configuration management of your system? Are you just going to, install it by hand? Are you going to, leverage something like Crowbar? Are you going to use, Puppet or Chef, or what are you going to use to try to keep the system patched, updated? And I think there's a lot of good tools out there, and this also plays into are you going to try to do this yourself, or are you going to partner with one of the groups or organizations or companies out there that that are really working with this? And I think in our case, we had some guys that were really familiar with Chef. We decided we were going to use Chef to do our package management and configuration management on the nodes. They had a bunch of recipes that were ready to go that we can kind of start using. I know Puppet's got stuff there, Crowbar. I haven't played around with it personally, but I've heard lots of people that have had a lot of good experience with that. So I think I'd be curious to hear what people are using out there, and what people's experience has been.
So just to clarify, Crowbar extends Chef, and the cookbooks that you guys are using were the Chef cookbooks originally, and they're the same ones that forked into Crowbar, so they all have a shared
ancestry. Yeah,
and
there
it's
you
all
go.
Coming back around, and hopefully everyone's collaborating.
So if everybody doesn't know, that's Matt is with Opscode that develops the Chef. He's just not that smart like that.
In all fairness, I did work on all the engagements.
Yeah, you just left in the holiday.
We love Matt.
Yeah, we did everything. I mean, early on in January, we wrote we did manual installs. It was, crappy, but we had to learn it and learn how it works. And then we wrote our own scripts around it, Pixie boot, and we did the whole installation and using Git to manage configuration and all that stuff. And evolved that a bit. Now we're working with Crowbar and trying to use that. Getting some experience on that. Done a lot of installs for the last 3 weeks.
Josh, how long did it take to do it manually?
Huh?
How long did it take to do it manually?
Doing it manually? Well, it probably took us a couple weeks just to get it so we knew what we were doing enough. And that was pretty far back too. Things were moving rapidly, and you try, head and it would work, and then you try head again and it wouldn't work because it's just constantly.
Everybody's nodding their head, yeah.
Yeah, so that was a tough thing, but once I convinced the ops guy, my developers to actually start doing config management and keeping track of stuff, it got right.
That's a challenge in itself.
Actually, that's almost verbatim how Greg and Rob decided to build Crowbar. They were doing all that manually and kind of got fed up with it and started working on it too. That's the origins of it.
And we took our development to a point, and then we looked at what was going on in the ecosystem and said, well, should we really be doing this, or should we be contributing and helping in other areas?
Is anybody using Juju, the product formerly known as Ensemble from
Kind of cool. I know we're in the crowbar country here, but I just thought I'd ask.
So we have comical folks here as well. Yeah. We're in crowbar country. Can I get a t-shirt that says it? Somebody get on that.
So I think the next big thing, that when you're thinking through kind of decisions is really around, the network and what kind of network topology you're going to use. And there's plenty of pitfalls here, whether it's VLAN or flat with DHCP. Originally, I guess 8 months ago when HP was first looking at this, we were under the naive assumption that, if we started with a VLAN model, that Quantum would be far enough along that we would be able to, kind of seamlessly shift over to Quantum before we really needed to scale beyond, a few thousand customers in our private beta. Since then, we've, reality, the hard wall of reality has sunk in, and our strategy right now is to transition to an interim solution, which will, basically be a flat networking solution where we're going to go with a distributed network controller. Because one of the issues we run into just in terms of scaling our deployment is the fact that the network controller winds up being a bottleneck and a single point of failure, and really an issue to not just your scalability but your availability as well. So we're going to be over the next few weeks transitioning the customers that are in our private beta deployment over to the flat network model, where we're going to deploy a network controller on each host, and that'll serve as the network controller for the VMs running on that host. And we're hoping that that'll kind of get us to a model that we can sustain until we do get to Quantum, sometime mid 2012 or whenever it's really ready for what feels prime time. So.
What code are you running right now for HP Cloud?
So today in the private beta in production, we're running Diablo 2 plus some patches to get it stable, and we are in the process of going to Diablo Final right now. So we've our plan was to actually be on Diablo Final a few weeks ago. Diablo Final was a little bit rougher around the edges than I think we were hoping it was going to be, and the process of us pulling that in and just putting it through our QA cycles, and we ran into some real problems with the SQL Alchemy layer, giving us some really wacky behavior that we had to work through, of course. And then we look at Essex, and it's all completely been refactored and redone. So we're like, okay, well, we have to battle it now just so we can get to Diablo Final, and then we'll have to, it's going to change again when we move to Essex. We also ran into some weird issues with the timeouts, trying to retrieve the metadata from the metadata server. That was causing a bunch of builds to fail, and so
never seen that happen.
No, never, right? So our plan is to get onto Diablo Final as soon as possible, and and really in parallel, we've got a lot of our QA team really trying to get engaged with Jay and the QA efforts, so we can make sure that when we do transition to Essex, that it's a much smoother process, and we can start to compress the time from when the final release is cut to when a deployment could successfully transition over to it. And I know Rackspace has got lots of resources involved in that process as well. So what about what are you guys doing out there in terms of networks? What type of configurations are you guys running? What have your experiences been dealing with networking at Nova?
There are a lot of people looking forward to Quantum. Networking is by far the worst part of Nova. I think most people will agree on that. Most of the deployments I've seen have either been flat DHCP or straight up flat network, or something custom.
Yeah.
I guess with Diablo, there's now the DHCP-HA mode.
Exactly.
Seems to be solving the problem.
Yeah, we're running ours in HA. And we use VLAN.
So do you guys anticipate a point where you're going to run into an issue with just the number of VLANs, or
well,
is it going to be a
we're
limited
kind of
number
a
of
different case
deployments?
because we're doing internal projects.
Yeah.
So, I don't expect to have thousands of projects on our cloud anytime soon, because we're not open to everybody.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're gonna, oh my gosh, there's all these people using it. It's like, all right, who can we onboard next, and who's re-architected their product or architected a product to work on a cloud system, and we put them on. So it's, tens.
Yeah.
you know.
I envy you.
Private is a lot easier.
No, that's
It's not that, and I mean, VLAN mode is great.
yeah, it works.
It's really great because we have, problems dealing with flat and flat DH.
And VLAN mode was really the first mode, really. I
Yep.
mean, that's what NASA built, so.
Yeah.
There wasn't much development that went into it, like after
Yeah, no,
the actual merger happened.
stopped, yeah.
Yeah, so,
This quantum's gonna be here any day now.
Just,
yeah.
Do users on your cloud leverage like multicast and broadcast and stuff? Do you leave that enabled in your deployments?
They are not at this point.
Okay.
Although we've got a few that we're talking to now
That would want to.
that are talking about doing
Yeah, that's another nice thing about VLAN mode today, at least. Is
Well, so you brought a pretty interesting point, just with internal projects. With your public cloud, I mean, you probably have a pretty good chunk of customers on that. Have you run into any scale problems in terms of concurrent connections or API issues or MySQL not scaling well with how Nova implements it?
So right now I think we've definitely run into some database issues, but it's mainly been around the SQL Alchemy layer rather than the MySQL deployment itself. I'll tell you, our biggest source of issues to date around Nova has really been around the message queue, RabbitMQ, and the nodes just hanging up or crapping out or who knows. I think sometimes we figure out what they're doing, other times we just have no clue what they're doing, and so.
Do you have to use RabbitMQ, or could you use ActiveMQ because it scales a little better?
You can use other options there. I know we've talked about looking into that, but that we've been interested to see kind of where the community is going to go with that as well.
We just discovered that we couldn't scale and collect it out with our public structures with Rabbit, and we found that Active it also gave us the ability to segregate queues and do kinds of high level things. We always were trying to make it collective work with a generic NQP message bus, but in the end, we had to use some of the features that were active to make it really scale out, and that's what shipped up an enterprise product.
Yeah.
It's active. It's not decent.
So I'm definitely not an expert in that area. So I'd be up if anybody else has any thoughts or has been keeping up with some of that conversation.
Plus, then you have the power of M collective right there too.
Yeah.
Right. Nice.
So one of the things we had on back
I'm sorry,
channel-
before you go on, did you find that using ActiveMQ did solve those
Yes.
problems?
I mean, there's at hyperscale. There's still some questions about how you're going to use message queues. So we haven't gone and taken Puppet Enterprise to Zynga yet, right? They're 50,000 nodes. They're point-to-point HTTP connected to Puppet Master. Makes a lot more sense, but we intend to figure out this
And
problem.
last question, who is we?
I'm with Puppet Labs. Great.
I got a question on that. How many messages are you pumping through?
Yeah, I'm not the right person to answer that question. I know I would have to look at our scale testing and give you the answer in earnest, but we post all that stuff.
So just, we're way deep in the vocabulary of OpenStack, so for people who aren't as deep in it, there's multiple network modes for OpenStack. When people talk about flat networking, basically they mean open networking. So all the nodes, it's like in a public cloud where all of the VMs are on the same network. We're all on a public network, so it's a flat networking space, as opposed to the VLAN mode where basically groups of VMs are going to be attached to their own dedicated VLANs. So segment security for the VLAN mode is by logical network partitions, and VMs are attached to the networks. Flat mode, straight flat mode, basically means the security is implied by the individual VMs, which is not particularly secure. Sort of the Wild West of cloud. And then some of the new modes like DHCP-HA and some of the DHCP modes, they actually do network filtering at the node level or at an aggregation point level. so that you have segmentation of traffic so that VMs are prevented from talking to places they shouldn't talk to. It's still fairly wide open, but it's more segmented. So Nova, because Nova has so many use cases, it supports a lot of different modes. Quantum is a whole nother animal where it actually creates dynamic flows between VMs and between access points. So when we get to Quantum, we're going to be talking about technologies like OpenFlow or Open vSwitch, which basically create dynamic network tunnels. It's pretty cool, wild stuff. And there's a whole bunch that's why it's a whole separate, probably multiple meeting topic.
Yeah, I don't want to turn into a quantum meeting, but I was curious about the relationship between OpenFlow, programmable networks, and Quantum.
Quantum is an API set to take advantage of those technologies.
Okay.
Yeah. So Quantum presents an API and kind of a control layer, and then there's going to be pluggable backends that could be any variety of proprietary or open source technologies that plug
It could
into.
be an OpenFlow controller, or it could be a Cisco hardware device.
Exactly.
I mean,
If Cisco will ever get that stuff.
They have a UCS plugin.
Would you guys be any more bleeding edge?
Why not?
The only way to inherit the future is to create it. Right? So let's go.
All right. So.
Another big reason we.
Okay.
I mean, security is another big reason we did VM because our security office is crazy.
So do you know what's like some of their specific objections? Was it just around, the fact that multiple VMs would be sharing the same bridge, the same network bridge,
No,
or they just
we just weren't stupid enough to try to do.
just try to even propose it? You didn't even want to fight that battle.
Yeah, no, these guys we're working with them right now, and it's fun.
All right. So any other comments around networking or?
Back to Nova, you mentioned nodes, locking up on the compute layer. Are your workloads actually failing over to other nodes, or are users just that are attached to those?
So it was not necessarily the node itself locking up. It was mainly just the listener process for RabbitMQ just dying or crapping out. And so you wouldn't if you were trying to currently build an instance on that node. That instance would hang indefinitely, or you wouldn't be able to build any new instances on that node. But anything that was actually running, stayed running. Now, our configuration is that instances are running on a local node, and if for whatever reason that node dies, then those instances will go ahead and die with it. We are working on a block storage solution, so you can have nodes that have root volumes based on block storage that would persist outside, that could persist outside of an individual node. But the current configuration for our cloud is very much, Amazon's model of, be prepared for an instance to disappear anytime.
So you guys are writing your own Nova volume?
So we are working on a driver for Nova volumes that will allow us to start exposing some block storage functionality.
Hey Blake, what the heck is that flat network?
What, didn't you listen to Rob? No, I mean, the
tweets.
I mean, so the flat network is really just about all of the VMs being on the same network, and so the only thing really protecting the VMs is either security groups if you're using security groups, or any type of network rules, a software firewall or whatever that you're running inside your instance. So it's basically like your instances, if you're in a public cloud where you don't know who the other tenants are on the system, then and you're running in flat network mode, you have to imagine that your instance is sitting on the public internet because you don't know who's going to be in the next instance over, and all you have in front of you is really whatever protection you're running inside your instance, and then the security groups if you're using security groups.
Yeah, it's a single collision domain too, so it's like everything can hear everything else on the network. So you can snoop other people's traffic, susceptible to packet storms, things like that.
Exactly.
Not that VLANs are real security, which is surprising. Security people would say VLANs for security.
No.
It sounds true.
It does.
That much, yes, barely.
I think there's a comment in the back now? All right.
So one of the things I want to do is I want to make sure, just as a time check.
Oh, yeah.
We get some other deployments too, so.
Yep. So I'll tell you what. So instead of I've got a couple other little things up here, but does anybody else have any questions or so you mentioned kind of areas where we run into issue scalability and why. So let me kind of touch on a couple. So another thing that we've run into a lot of issues with is scalability limits tend not to be the static limits of the system in terms of how many instances you're running, but more of the dynamic, how many you're trying to do at the same time type of thing. Somebody's trying to spin up 100 or 500 or 1,000 nodes at the same time. If they were to do that over the course of a few days, the system would be fine. Glance has been one area where we've dealt with some issues. Figuring out how to scale. Making sure we've got enough Glance servers in to distribute that load.
How's Glance configured? Is it local or using Swift?
Yeah, so that brings up a good point. So so Glance, you have a couple options there. You can have Glance use just local hard drives as the data store. You can also have Glance use Swift, which is how we have our system set up. So all the images, even our base images, are stored in Swift. They're streamed by Glance to the compute nodes when we're building it. When we're building a new instance. We found out the hard way back in Diablo 2. There was a little bug in Glance that didn't allow images that were bigger than 5 gigs to work through Glance. So if you're using our public beta today, you've got a root volume that's less than 5 gigs to avoid that problem, so you can actually create images. That's been fixed in Diablo Final, but we're not quite on Diablo Final. But yeah, so the streaming of that, and we've also had some nasty problems where on the compute nodes cache those images once they've been streamed from Glance, and if there was an issue and that image got corrupted or it gets corrupted when it's sitting on the compute node doesn't realize that it's got a corrupted cached image, and so when you try to build a new instance on that compute node, it's trying to build off that corrupted image, and there's nothing that's going up and cleaning up that cache. So that's one of the blueprints we put in for Essex, is to really start to be a little more proactive about managing that cache on the compute nodes, because that's been one that's been an issue for us. And the other kind of strategy we have around scaling is really by using multiple deployments. So our plan is to have multiple availability zones that exist inside a region, and kind of scale our availability zones independently. So each availability zone has its own database and message queue. The problem is all the multi-zone stuff in Nova isn't quite done. There's a lot of work going on in there. Rackspace is kind of spearheading a lot of that. So what we did kind of initially is we've set up, 2 kind of completely separate deployments. So our availability zones are completely independent deployments of Nova today. And then our plan, so that allows us to kind of run these to a certain scale. We've got about 500 nodes in each of them right now. And then at some point, once we're comfortable with, where the multi-zone stuff is, our plan is to kind of launch an umbrella zone that becomes the region zone that's going to kind of subsume those individual deployments. So that's kind of our strategy of how we can kind of get a bigger footprint in a region without having all the multi-zone stuff in place already.
You say 500 nodes?
Yeah.
What is your API strategy? Like one API server for 100 nodes, load balanced, or what's been your experience there?
I am not sure exactly how many API servers we are running. We are using an Apogee device in front of that to do load balancing, and also helps us with analytics and some things like that. And we're load balancing between multiple API servers. I think we have 3 in there right now. But I don't know if I think that was just like the overkill. Let's make sure we're not going to have a problem initially.
Yeah, everyone knows the answer to that. So I was wondering
yeah.
Interesting.
All right, so I want to give some time to other people to talk about their deployments. Anybody else have any other questions or anything? Or
I just have a quick one on, and I'll be asking the same question to everybody. Your storage subsystem, I have been testing Zen and KVM, I'm having issues with the I/O What are you using for this?
I believe they are. I mean, they're configured in RAID. I'm not sure the exact configuration, but I'm not sure. I'm definitely not the expert. I'll tell you, if you shoot me an email or something after this, I can give you a card. I can put you in touch with somebody that would know exactly what we're using.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Anybody else setting this up at all in the lab, or?
Every day in the lab.